Welcome back. We're with a very special guest, independent scientist Leuren Moret, who's coming to us from Berkeley, California. Welcome, Leuren.
Thank you.
Well, you know, this is quite a coincidence because today is April 8th, and that's exactly 1 month from March 8th, which is when Malaysian Airlines MH370, quote, disappeared, end of quote. And we did a special which has now, I believe the last time I checked, it has been viewed over 4,250,000 minutes, almost 150,000 views. And it appears still to be the most up-to-date and valid interpretation unmasking this 30-day global psyops. And you were kind enough to give your time and prepare a remarkable 15-page update, which we'll have online, and the link to that is in the video description, and people will just go to that, and we'll be going through that. And just to get started, there's an old adage in journalism, the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, and why. So in terms of this 30-day update, do we know who? That is, who was responsible for the downing or the disappearance of flight MH370?
Well, I've been doing a lot of research and investigations and teasing out a lot of facts and things that are hidden. I finally went to the Malaysian local newspapers. Thank goodness they're online. And I was able to find some very, very interesting information that does help identify and verify that my original suspicion was that Britain, the United Kingdom, and the U.S. are behind this false flag event of the involving the disappearance of Flight 370. So the question is, why?
Well, before we get to why is the final W, the next W is what? What exactly happened to it? It quote disappeared, but what happened to it that it disappeared?
What happened to it?
There are all these theories. It was hijacked, and this, that, and the other thing.
That's right.
What exactly happened?
Well, because I'm a scientist, I approach investigations and research from the scientific facts. And so I went back and I collected data, for instance, on the radar. This is the key to understanding what happened, who, what, when, where, why, all of that. And no country, no agency, no one will release the data on the radar. So I said, well, who knew where the plane was? Who was doing radar tracking? And what should have happened when Flight 370 disappeared? Now, I looked at Malaysia, and the air traffic controllers at Kuala Lumpur Airport used the Marconi radar system, which Tun Dr. Mahathir, the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, signed a contract with Margaret Thatcher to purchase this Marconi radar system for Malaysia. It was installed in 1995, and even Mahathir's later vice president, who was the former finance minister at the time of the purchase, approved that sale. And a number of times in the media, he said very clearly recently, since the plane disappeared, that the radar system should have been on. There are multiple stations around Malaysia, even if one had turned it off or it was malfunctioning or whatever. There were many other locations where these radar stations were located. It's a system. And he said that he has that's what he said, that they obviously had plenty of radar, military and civilian. Now, he, interestingly enough, admitted that he was related to the plane's pilot, Zahari Ahmad Shah, via an in-law. So, you began to look at connections and wonder if it's meaningful. And he said that radar system covers all of Malaysia, the coastlines, and parts of the South China Sea. In fact, Malaysian airspace extends out over the ocean, over the Indian Ocean to the west, and over the Gulf of Thailand, which is where that plane disappeared. So definitely Malaysia's military and their civilian ground crews, the flight controllers on the ground at the airports, did have radar, but none of that has been released. Vietnam also had air traffic controllers tracking the plane because it was due to come in and over Ho Chi Minh City and check in with that ground crew. It has been reported all through the media since this disaster happened, since the plane disappeared, that it was on the edge of Malaysian airspace and Vietnam airspace. So the Vietnamese, the Malaysians should have been tracking it. We know Vietnam was tracking it. And the Ho Chi Minh City air traffic controllers reported that they lost contact with Flight 370 at about 1:21 a.m.
So that's the third W, which is when.
When? Yes.
Right. The 1:21 a.m. exactly 30 days ago on March 8th, correct?
That's correct.
Right. Now, where?
Sorry.
Coming to the fourth W, where was that? Where did they lose track of it?
I haven't finished talking about
sorry. Sorry.
Thailand also is a part of the peninsula and extends into the Cambodia, Laos area region north of Malaysia. And they have a highly militarized country. And at the time the plane disappeared, they were running two joint, very large multinational military exercises in Thailand involving Army, Navy, and Air Force from those 25 countries, and it was American-led. So the American military was in charge of those exercises, and that means if there was a Navy presence, the U.S. had aircraft carriers, they had other ships and boats, they had planes, they had radar, they had everything with them, and on an aircraft carrier, they almost never turned the radar off. Okay, multiply that times 25 times, and you have 26 countries and militaries in full military exercises with radar on. And of course, they absolutely would have been tracking all aircraft in that region because of any threats to the military exercises. They would want to stop them. The two exercises that were underway have been held every year for a while. Cobra Gold and Cope Tiger. February 11th to March 25th first were underway in Thailand. And they were led by the U.S., but Thailand, Singapore, and then there were observer countries also: Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, South Korea. So you see Malaysia was there. Cambodia, China, Laos, Myanmar, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Russia, South Africa, Sri Lanka, and Timor-Leste. So there was a full-blown military presence there, and this was a drill. And what we know about every false flag that's happened in the U.S., Haiti, Hurricane Katrina, Sumatra, all of these earthquakes and hurricanes and everything have always had a drill going on, FEMA or Homeland Security or the military, when suddenly the drills went live. So the Thai military was reported on CNN on March 18th to have stated, quote, the Thai military was receiving normal flight path and communication data from the Boeing 777-200 on its planned March 8th route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing until 1:22 a.m. when it disappeared from its radar. Now that the air route for Flight 370 has been shown many times in the media on maps, and what we know is that the flight path leaves Kuala Lumpur and flies to the northeast towards Malaysia across the Gulf of Thailand. And it's always the same path, and it's always been reported in the media that it was entering the Vietnam airspace from the Malaysia airspace. So that it gave the impression that no other airspaces, it was not transiting any other airspaces in the region on the way to Vietnam. Now, I was able, after 3 weeks of looking day and night, I was able to find a map in Scientific American which had a story on this plane recently, the disappearance of it, and it has all of the airspaces, the regions of airspace by country on this map. And it also shows the location of Flight 370 on this map, and it's not in Malaysia airspace. It's not in Thai airspace. It's not in Vietnam airspace. It had just entered Singapore airspace, and it was leveling out at its cruise altitude. It was at 34,000 feet, and just finishing that last climb of 1,000 feet to 35,000 when it disappeared.
Right, right. So we'll be getting into the significance of being in Singapore airspace
Right.
later in the program. And just briefly now, we're into the why, and I know that that's complex, and we'll get into the the whys. Why was this all done? But just briefly at this time, just in kind of point form, why do you think all of this was done? This 30-day, first of all, a civilian passenger plane destroyed, and then with all the harm to civilians, to their families, and then a 30-day psyops, the attention drawn from where the plane was downed by a U.S. Navy directed energy weapon in Singapore airspace, uh, around the South China Sea area, way and the Gulf of Thailand, way over to the Indian Ocean, misdirection, the false flag. Why was all this done for 30 days and counting? There's still Prime Minister of Australia. I mean, it's like all the world powers are in on this.
Well, I'll just sum it up very succinctly with a question. Why does the sun never set on the British Empire? Because who would trust an Englishman in the dark? That's the answer. And the answer in detail is that from the very start, when the Vietnamese admiral discovered from military airplanes, he set out to search for Flight 370, he discovered a tail section from an airplane, a commercial plane, and what was probably a cabin door. But it was at dusk on Sunday, the next day after the plane disappeared. And he sent aircraft out, and just at dusk, when it was getting dark, they found the tail section and a cabin door. And the next day, he sent them out again in the daylight, and they discovered 2 9 or 10 feet long oil slicks. Now, what happened between Sunday night and Monday morning is that the American media took over completely by Monday morning, all of the news globally, and just flooded the airways, TV, radio, the internet with all these bogus stories, and just sort of a game like Where's Waldo, the child's book, where at each page the child has to find where this Waldo character is hiding in the drawings on the page. So what happened was, it's been a month of Where's Waldo games involving 25 countries, ships. I'm sure hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent on this phony search in all the wrong places for Flight 370. And think of all the pain and suffering this has caused to the family members in China, in Malaysia, and other countries who had family members and friends on that flight. So what has happened is that initially the tail section and the cabin door and the oil slicks were solid forensic evidence of the site of the airplane crash. Those disappeared by Monday morning, and they were said to have not existed. Well, I'm sorry, but a Vietnamese admiral said that his military flight people that he had sent out in planes located these items, and they were confirmed by a satellite photo released by the Chinese, who were just completely exasperated, that showed floating items in the ocean at the correct location. The oil slicks and the floating tail section and door were exactly where they should have been in terms of where the plane was when it disappeared. So, so the forensic evidence, which should have helped identify and locate and everything, the crash site, the black boxes, everything, the mainstream media, Fox News, CNN, and ABC, NBC, all the U.S. news media just made that evidence disappear. It didn't exist. But, you know, we do have satellite photos of it. Now, what's interesting is no country has released radar data and China has been the only one to release satellite data that I know of. So why did Flight 137 go down in Singapore airspace? Well, it's going back to the British and the US working together in collusion. And of course, Singapore has been for some time the headquarters in Southeast Asia for the CIA and for MI6. So it's the British and US headquarters for operations in Southeast Asia. And right now, Southeast Asia is hot, hot, hot because the British and the US are planning to mine Southeast Asia, these island arcs that are very, very rich in minerals and metals, to sell those minerals and metals to China as the Chinese economy is pumped and built to replace the Western economy. The Western economy is being collapsed by the Fukushima disaster, the effects of it, and this and Japan, also Europe, are on the downturn economically. And it's this superpower, this Brzezinski's middle region in the grand chessboard, that is being pumped as the new global economy. And that would be Russia and China, with other Central Asian countries.
Right, right. Well, now that we've gone initially through the 5 who, what, where, when, and why, let's go to your very thorough 15-page research paper that includes evidentiary images and forensic evidence of where the plane actually is.
Okay.
And let's go through it step by step, starting with the radar.
The radar.
Who knew where the plane
Yes.
was, radar
Yeah.
tracking, and what should have happened when
Yes.
Flight 370 disappeared. Let's just start going through what the reality is and not what the psyops is.
Right. The defense minister and acting transport minister of Malaysia has been the main spokesperson on the disappearance of Flight 370. His name is Datuk Seri Hishamuddin Hussein. Now remember, he's acting transport minister. Why did they make him temporarily the acting transport minister if he's already the defense minister? He is talking now in the media about, and this is an April 3rd article, a need to strengthen the nation's military assets following the disappearance of Flight 370. So here we get why. This is a hint that increased militarization of that region and of Malaysia is part of this new world order grand chessboard that we've been put on because of the disappearance of Flight 370. We're on the new world order chessboard, and the big boys are playing now. This is not regional. This is not about Malaysia. This is about the global new world order chess game that is happening. And we, as Americans, you as Canadians, we're all right in the middle of it. So in the 1990s, as I mentioned, Mahathir contracted with Margaret Thatcher for the Marconi radar system. And since then, hundreds of millions of dollars has been spent to purchase more radar, to upgrade it, to update it as recently as 2013. So they have the capability, the Malaysian radar, to, let's see, let me just find this. They have met their stage 1 goals full coverage of Malaysian airspace. Stage 2 is the full integration and networking of all armed forces radar coverage, along with the Malaysian Department of Civil Aviation. And the third and final stage is to include satellite and aircraft with surface-to-air missile systems in the air defense network. So we can see where this is going right now, and why the disappearance of Flight 370. What would that mean? Well, the U.S. and Britain have sold them all their radar systems and military items, ships, planes, everything. So this is a huge defense package for Malaysia to purchase, and who will benefit? It's Britain and the U.S.
Right, right. Now, do you want to go through? Did you go through earlier the relationship of Anwar Ibrahim to the original purchase, and the fact that he's the opposition leader now?
Yes, Anwar Ibrahim was the finance minister when the Marconi radar system was purchased from Britain. That was in the 1990s. Later, Tun Dr. Mahathir, the former prime minister of Malaysia, but prime minister at that time, and you and I both know him very well. He was prime minister for 22 years, the first non-royal prime minister of Malaysia since they left the Commonwealth. And he was convicted of sodomizing his driver when he was vice president of Malaysia with Mahathir, and he went to prison. When he got out of prison, and Mahathir told me the story himself, he said Mr. Ibrahim was immediately offered a job by Wolfowitz at the World Bank. And what that revealed to Mahathir was that this very trusted assistant prime minister or associate prime minister under prime minister that Mahathir had handpicked and trained for the job had actually betrayed him and was a British agent. Leopards don't change their spots. Not only was Anwar Ibrahim convicted again after the plane disappeared with his relative as the pilot on March the 8th, but he went to prison on that day or several days afterwards for a second conviction of sodomizing someone, male, in Malaysia. He is running for prime minister from prison of Malaysia, and hopes to get elected. And so now, not only does the ruling party, which has been in office for a while, not only are they a Zionist infiltrated sellout to the Western economies, Western countries like Britain and the U.S., but the opposition party leader is in prison convicted of his second sodomy case, and he is running for president, and he is known to be a British agent.
Yeah, but significantly, he personally authorized the installation of the system, radar system.
Yes, he did.
And the radar system would have picked up the missing plane.
Yes, he did.
And he stated that the radar would have instantly noticed when the plane, why the radar operators were unable to check on the plane's journey, and he questioned why the Malaysian Air Force had not gone after the plane. So he is sort of the the person who is really trying to unearth the Malaysian Air Force collusion and cover up with a false flag here, wouldn't you say?
Well, I would, and it does appear to me that people in the government, key people, as well as in the Department of Defense, have been they have been bribed by the American and British defense industries to go along with these purchases that are not necessary. They involve billions of dollars. And of course, the way those defense agencies work is they just bribe anybody in the way. And this has been reported many, many times with Boeing, Lockheed, all of the Raytheon, all of the American defense people, and also British.
Right. So let's now just follow that. Vietnam stated that their air traffic controllers were tracking the plane,
Yes.
and that it lost. Uh, uh, it disappeared from their radar at 1:21 a.m. on March 8th,
Yes.
and that's Ho Chi Minh City air traffic controllers. So take it from there.
Yes. So the flight disappeared, and one way to locate it would have been the transponders. And in air navigation, a plane transponder is a transmitter receiver. In other words, the plane transmits a signal, which is a squawk code, with altitude information, and there are also other special codes for different kinds of emergency situations on the plane. So without saying a word, the pilot could notify the ground crews if there was a hijacking or a fire or whatever. It's just a 4-number code that he types in, and it just goes instantaneously to the ground crews. So what happens is the ground crews will send a signal to the plane's transponder. The transponder receives it and sends information back to the ground crew, giving altitude and location. And the only time that transponder would be turned off is if there were electrical problems or intermittent problems with the transponder. It wasn't working right, in other words, or if the ground crew asked them to, and that often happens at about 500 feet altitude when they're coming in for a landing, so that all the planes landing and taking off are not confusing each other with transponder pings. So the air traffic controllers use that signal to identify the aircraft and to maintain separation between the airplanes in the air so they don't run into each other. Now, if that transponder is turned off, it doesn't mean that the ground crews, the air traffic controllers, lose contact with the airplane. There are many other electrical signals. There are multiple radio transmitters and radio systems on the plane. They have more than one choice, at least 3 for alternative radio transmitters. Another thing is that this plane had Rolls-Royce engines in it. The Rolls-Royce company from England actually tracks every plane the entire time it's in the air if that plane has Rolls-Royce engines. They also have a complete record of that airplane and what happened to it, but they will not release it. Now remember, they're British. The black box, which is what this big search is for now in the Indian Ocean, it's a wild goose chase, but the black box is very strong, and it's been built and located in the plane so that if the plane crashes, the last 30 minutes of activities and conversation in the cockpit is recorded in that black box and preserved. It's very, very robust and can withstand fires, be dropped in the ocean, all kinds of catastrophic events. And that's the first thing they always look for in a plane crash, because that tells what happened. Or usually it does. And then, so that's the transponders. We have covered the radar, and I'd like to talk about the satellites now.
But first, just before we leave the black box, now what's said here is that after a crash, the black box transmits a signal for 30 days until the battery runs down. Correct?
That's right.
Today's April 8th. So that's
That's right.
30 days after March 8th.
That's
so
right.
Today, the black box from MH370, if the normal specifications of its black box are normal, are according to industry specs, it would presumably run down around today.
That's correct.
And so they've stretched out this psyops to run out the clock on the black box. It would seem so, by diversions into the Indian Ocean. I'm just kind of speculating here.
That's correct. And the satellite company, one in particular that was involved, is the culprit. This is very, very interesting. Who has satellites? Who could know from satellite information? Well, the US, Russia, China, I'm sure India has them, Japan has them. There are many countries who have satellites, including the US, and there are hundreds of thousands of satellites up there that we don't even know about. We don't even know how many satellites have been launched, and we don't even know where they are, because they launch them and then they just disappear. And they may be officially located 200 miles off of the surface of the Earth, but when you start reading, for instance, about this, all of a sudden sources of information are saying, well, those satellites are 500 feet off of the Earth. Miles. Miles, yes. And so then you start asking, what are those really for, and who launched them, and what are they for? So the U.S. has never offered any satellite information whatsoever to assist in the determination of what happened to Flight 370. That's very strange. We do know, Americans know, that the little 2-inch number plate that's in the windshield, just below the windshield in our cars on the dashboard, is tracked. Your car is tracked by satellites from space that can actually read those numbers that are they're very, very tiny. They're just a large font size on your computer. So that's the detail ability that that the satellites have, and the plane was even 35,000 feet, almost 35,000 feet, which would put them 5 miles closer to the satellites or more. So there should have been U.S. input of our satellite data, and we could have done it in a way that did not give any secrets away. On April 6th of 2012, at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, a satellite was launched for the NSA, the National Security Agency, which is the satellite people and the highest level of the intelligence community in the United States. They put a NROL 25 satellite in space with synthetic aperture radar that can observe objects globally in the daylight and darkness. It can penetrate clouds, and it can even identify underground bunkers because it's ground penetrating. And this is just one of many, many, many satellites that the NSA has. And one of their logos with an NRO 39 satellite emblem on it states, "Nothing is beyond our reach." So that pretty much tells you that the U.S. knows what happened to that plane and is not divulging it. The GPS is another tool, a necessary tool for location and tracking of all kinds of things on the ground and in the air. That was put on satellites starting in the 1950s for the military in the United States, and in 1983, President Reagan authorized it for civilian satellites, and so these planes all are hooked up to GPS. Even the local bus transit in the San Francisco Bay Area at the bus stops, they have GPS on all the buses, and all of the times of arrival and departure are at each bus stop on a monitor. It's just really great. So that's GPS, which has percolated into many aspects of civilian life now. The Marconi Corporation in Britain manufactures electronic systems for Britain and the government and the military, and they are very integrated and involved with BAE, which is British Aerospace, I think it's Enterprises, a very, very secret corporation. I don't know if it's part of the British government or it's private, but it's very, very, very dangerous to work for it, actually. A lot of people have been murdered. Prime Minister Mahathir signed that contract with Margaret Thatcher to purchase their radar system, which was 4 times more costly than the American Raytheon system that actually works better with the British military, the U.S. military, and the Malaysian military. But for some reason, the British one was chosen. PhoneSat is another entity that was involved in this. PhoneSat is phone satellites, satellite phones. This company is the Iridium satellite system, and it is located in McLean, Virginia, which is a known CIA operations area. And they provide, PhoneSat provides service for Inmarsat satellite phones. Now, Inmarsat is the key to understanding what happened to Flight 370, because Inmarsat has long co-manufactured satellites with Boeing. So why did Inmarsat have so much say in down-powering the search for Flight 370? It was Inmarsat that had tremendous influence over the entire Western media to misreport and to do a cover-up on what happened throughout the whole global media. That's a pretty powerful organization if they're able to persuade the whole entire global media to misreport. Now, Inmarsat tracks all shipping traffic globally, and they now want to expand into the airplane traffic, civilian air traffic. And that would mean a tremendous increase in business and global surveillance of ship and air traffic from their headquarters in England. That's really interesting. 93,000 flights a day are scheduled and fly to 9,000 airports around the world every day. That's a huge increase in business for them, but it's an even greater increase in global monitoring of commerce. It's basically globally monitoring commerce as well as civilian travel. Now, what happened is Inmarsat, through a series of lies and deceptions and misrepresentation of information and science technology, they misdirected and hijacked the search for the Flight 370 in the Gulf of Thailand and sabotaged that search by saying they were tracking pings or the transponder on Flight 370 for 7 hours after it disappeared in the Singapore airspace. They said they did not have GPS on that particular satellite. One satellite, they said, was tracking Flight 370 from Malaysia all across the Indian Ocean. Well, I got on a plane in Malaysia and flew to Sri Lanka, which is on the east side of India, and believe me, I thought I was never going to get there. It was a 3.5 hour or 4 hour flight. The Indian Ocean is huge, and they reported that they used the Doppler effect, which is a physical parameter they can measure, and they can triangulate from the Doppler sounds where that plane might have flown in the Indian Ocean. So they misrepresented that because you don't need GPS or anything else to triangulate with the Doppler effect except 3 observation points, which in this case would be satellites. So the other big lie is that a satellite is in view. Alfred?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, your picture froze.
Yeah, they've been playing with our pictures.
Yeah,
and,
okay.
And they've been freezing yours a bit, but then you come back. Yeah.
Okay, so I found a photograph, an image of the headquarters inside of Inmarsat, their headquarters in Britain, and it's an image of the entire satellite network, and it absolutely confirms that a satellite is in view for only about 24 minutes before it disappears over the horizon, and another satellite is used to continue transmitting and collecting information, receiving and transmitting. So there wasn't one satellite, just one satellite tracking that plane for 7 hours or 5 hours as it flew across the Indian Ocean. There were at least 10 and maybe as many as 20. And the likelihood of any of those or all of them having GPS on them so they would know instantaneously where that plane was is a bald-faced lie. Now, Intersat is British and a very strong player, we know now, in the disaster cover-up. And it also very strongly demonstrates that the British are involved in this cover-up and the disappearance of Flight 370 by redirecting the rescue efforts away from the crash site. They could have found the black box by now if they had looked in the Singapore, below the Singapore airspace where that plane disappeared, and where the Vietnamese admiral found the oil slicks and located the tail section. But the international media, under pressure from Inmarsat in England, diverted and redirected the search for 30 days to a location where they knew no one would ever find the crash or the black box because they were looking in the wrong place.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I just like this. Sorry to interrupt you. That you've actually included the forensic evidence of the
the
location of the plane and of the oil slick
yes,
in the report,
yes,
whose link the viewers can access
yes.
at the in the video description. I just wanted to mention that.
Yes. So, China also uh, got exasperated because more than half of the passengers were Chinese. I believe, I'm not sure how many, a couple hundred maybe. And these all kinds of terrible things happened to them. The Chinese in Malaysia waiting for their family members didn't have passports. A lot of them didn't. So the Malaysian Air refused to fly them out to the area where the plane was thought to have disappeared. Um, they were treated very badly by Malaysian Airlines and the military, who that defense minister has been the main spokesperson the whole time, and the family members were locked up in rooms and treated very badly. They weren't allowed to talk to the media or attend the press conferences. And in China, in Beijing, where the plane was going, distraught families were there also, wanting to know day after day after day. Well, after a month, that would exasperate anyone. But by March the 12th, 4 days after the plane disappeared, China released a satellite photo of the airplane debris that had been found in the South China Sea, where the plane should have gone down. And according to the timing and the disappearance and the route. So that was good evidence that that Vietnam admiral located and described, and he, of course, was ignored, and his evidence just completely, the forensic evidence disappeared completely from the media and was just buried in that media blitz by the US and the UK. And BBC has made a lot of reports as well. But it's mainly been Fox, NBC, ABC, MSNBC, and then, of course, the BBC. So, Malaysian Air Flight 370, initiated by Inmarsat, has now become the target of international misdirection of the search to set up a false flag event. And who could do that better than the British and the US working together?
Right. Exactly. Now let's switch then and begin to talk about the evidence that you've put together that mid-air disintegration is the most likely cause of disappearance of Flight 370.
From all of the interviews that have been reported in the media and also on YouTube and so forth with military personnel in England and the US and other countries, almost all of them have unanimously said that it was most likely a mid-air disintegration of the plane. So with that in thought, I'm not going to go over all of the theories and the unlikely causes. I want to focus on mid-air disintegration, since the military is assessing it as the most likely cause of the disappearance of that plane. So I'm going to consider three aspects of that mid-air disintegration. One is the Wigner effect. Another one is hijacking. And the third one is shooting that plane down with a pulsed energy weapon or a missile. The Wigner effect is something that is affecting planes and metallic objects very drastically since the Fukushima disaster on March 11th, 2011. It's 3 years now. And what has happened is that so much radiation was released from Fukushima. It's thousands and thousands and maybe even millions of Chernobyls. And the neutron bombardment of metals, it's also alpha, beta, gamma, and X-rays that also are other aspects of radiation in the nucleus. The neutron and other particle and ray bombardment by these radioactive particles that are all over the global planet in abundance attack the crystal structure of metals and weaken that crystal structure and make the metal brittle. So what has been happening, it just started to be reported about 2 or 3 months ago, that we noticed at least, is that commercial aircraft, civilian aircraft, and military aircraft around the world are having parts fly off of the planes in midair, or windshields even are flying off of military jets. And we know that, for instance, at the Kadena military base in Okinawa, and you and I have been there, watching CIA executive jets take off on probably conditioned flights. These jets, these fighter jets, 10 of them were reported just at Kadena to have lost parts off of the planes. These fighter jets were flying through the air, and parts started flying off of them. 4 of those jets, additional jets, lost their windshield in midair, and the pilots had to land these fighter jets without windshields. This has also been reported. Planes are having to land in Hawaii on their trans-Pacific flights because of trouble with the hydraulics in the landing gear, or the flaps, or other parts of the tail, or the elevators, things like that. And this is starting to be a real concern. I noticed in a video clip at the Fukushima nuclear power plant, which is where the nuclear disaster occurred, I was watching a TEPCO perimeter video clip of workers at the plant removing spent fuel rods from building 4 and lifting them with a crane, using a big, huge crane to lift them out of the building in the damaged pools to put them in dry casks for storage. So 6 of them were standing there, all suited up in protective gear, looking at the fuel rods and the cask, and they never noticed a huge crane in the background. It was one of 5 in between the buildings. It suddenly just slowly, in slow motion, collapsed onto the ground. And that was the metal fatigue. But since there have been no reports so far of planes crashing and the people on the planes being killed, I don't think that the Wigner effect yet has caused any airplane crashes. So I think this is not the likely cause of the disappearance of Flight 370. But it does need to be considered in all airplane crashes from now on. Hijacking. we have no forensic evidence, no data, and no radar to indicate that hijacking was the cause of the disappearance of that plane, although the media went wild over the hijacking theory. Colonel J. Joseph, who's an American, he's a former jet pilot, and he's the CEO of his own airplane company now. And he said very clearly there's no factual data that a hijacking occurred. He just said, no, it wasn't a hijacking. So in the absence of radar data is the problem with resolving this issue. And the Malaysian, US, Singapore, Thai, Vietnam, etc. governments and militaries have that radar data, but they absolutely refuse to release it. That's pretty significant in indicating what did happen to Flight 370 that they don't want us to know happened to 370, because I am certain and confident that the U.S. Navy shot it down with a new pulsed laser weapon or a new pulsed energy weapon that they posted on YouTube, 2 demonstrations 2 days before Flight 370 disappeared. And Lockheed Martin released a media blitz about a week before that plane disappeared, announcing that sales are on now for that pulsed weapon or a similar one. So there they had their live demonstration, Flight 370. The military exercises that were going on in Thailand had, as I mentioned, all these militaries involved, Navy, Air Force, and the Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Army. And so certainly they had their radar on. That's about 25 countries. Now, how can all these countries, satellite companies, Minister of Defense, and other people in Malaysia involved with the airline and the government, how can all these people be part of such a cover-up? Well, it happened with Fukushima, it happened with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it happened with the Sumatra earthquake, the Kobe earthquake, it's happened with all these airplane crashes that we know already the U.S. is not shy to carry out, and I'm going to list them in a few minutes. But there were over 4,000 U.S. troops in Thailand when that happened. So there's no excuse for not having radar data. It's purposeful, it's deliberate, and it's part of the cover-up. The likelihood that an aircraft carrier's radar was turned off at any time, because they never turn their radar off, is highly unlikely. And with that kind of activity and congestion of national airspaces, a national radar infrastructure would only be turned off if it was told to be turned off. And I doubt that they would turn off all the radar in 5 surrounding countries as well. In fact, I doubt they turned the radar off in Malaysia. I don't believe it. So, since there's no radar data for the altitude and cruise pattern, the length of time the plane could stay in the air with the fuel it had, which is hard to determine because you have to know the altitude it was flying at. It burns up much more fuel at lower altitudes. Without that, we can't really say whether it was missile or pulsed energy weapons or what, but the likelihood that it disintegrated in air, mid-air, is the most likely explanation. Now, a sighting by an oil rig worker is another piece of visual information. That would be forensic information also. And a New Zealander who was an oil rig worker in that area where the plane disappeared said that he looked up in the sky at the time the plane was overhead, and he saw a very large plane very high in the sky. He could see the lights and everything. And he said it was whole. The whole plane was intact. But he said suddenly there were flames everywhere, and the plane burned for 10 to 15 seconds and disappeared. Completely disappeared, blacked out. He tried to get that into the media the first day that the plane had disappeared, and he got buried. But later on, maybe a week later, some people helped him to get that information out. And it was over the internet, and then it was picked up by the mainstream media, but not all media outlets. So Russia Today did a recent interview with Colonel Joseph. This is the Shevardnadze, who is the host or the anchor, asking the question, so could the plane be taken down by something like a missile, for example? And Colonel Joseph responded, I will tell you that one of my first thoughts when that mishap occurred, it was first reported, was a possibility of an unintentional or even intentional shoot down. It is conceivable. Loss of radar data certainly adds to that. In other words, he's saying no one will release the radar data, especially the military. And he said that's an indicator right there that a missile shot it down or a pulsed energy weapon. And he's asking, why didn't anyone in the global intelligence community come to assist with data that they had? He said, quote, most of the world is under this surveillance in some way, shape, form, or another. And certainly satellite imagery would be something that would pick up a bright flash like that had that occurred in the night sky over a dark ocean. So I think we would have seen some preliminary intelligence data at least pointing us in that direction had that been the occurrence. So here are the intelligence agencies also part of the cover-up. And then, of course, the U.S. Navy released that video clip, 2 demonstrations, a simulated demonstration and a live demonstration of that pulsed energy system, which they had been testing in the region of Malaysia and Thailand for 6 months already before these exercises started. It's a new system. That's the first ship to get it. And so they were fine-tuning it and testing it, learning how to use it right before this shoot down. They're already there. They've been there for 6 months. So what are some precedents that might give us more information about how a plane can be taken down? From the 1970s, in fact, 1976, a Russian pilot named Lieutenant Malenko was flying the most sophisticated and the hottest Russian MiG-25C, and he flew right out of the Soviet Union to North Japan and landed the plane at Hakodate Airport. And he sat in the plane with his gun loaded, and he told over the radio the Japanese at that airport, do not come anywhere near the plane, I will shoot you. And he gave them a phone number that had already been set up for someone to come and meet him there. And so they waited until this person arrived, and then the Japanese covered the plane and examined it, and then the U.S. went to Japan and examined it. And what they found was that this plane only had missiles on it. It didn't have bombs or other weapons like guns or whatever, but it did have a radar system that could be turned up to such high intensity that they could shoot down planes very effectively with that sophisticated radar system. So even just radar on a plane, if it's the right system, can shoot a plane down. That's a directed energy weapon, basically, one of the first ones. And that plane was used by Egyptians in the Yom Kippur War. Many Middle Eastern countries such as Iran, Iraq, Syria, other countries have had that fighter, and that is a very, very dangerous plane even today. Are you still there, Alfred?
Yeah, am I?
Oh, shit.
Am I not? I am here. Do you not hear me?
Alfred, you here?
Yeah. Do you not hear me?
Dropped. How long ago did we get dropped?
You're not dropped. You are recording here and you're fine.
Okay, well then we'll go ahead and we'll pick it back up again. I'll let Leuren know. We weren't seeing you moving.
Oh no, I'm
moving now?
yeah.